Man, it's kind of like, where do you start, right? The first thing I do want to say is that I didn't get to this place that I'm at on an ISO mission. And I believe like if we could like see in the spirit, if you will, you would see every person that had a play or a part in who I am today. From my family and being raised in church to every coach, to my dad and the father figures that God brought into my life, to recently my pastor at Access Church, my friends, my family members, my wife, my kids. And so it's taken a village. I just want to say that, right? I really believe in honor. And I don't believe men arise to some place in of themselves. It's obviously the Holy Spirit, and it's a team. There's people praying. There's intercessors that have decided to use their life to pray for us and intercede for us. And so my testimony, man, I remember back when I was just a kid. I loved being outside, loved playing sports. And then something happened at 7 years old. My parents divorced. My mom started working 2 or 3 jobs. It was my older brother, myself, and my sister, just 3 of us. And we had to find a way to do life really without our dad, but also with ourselves, because my mom worked 2 or 3 jobs. And I remember like it was yesterday, I started playing basketball outside. And I was always pretty much taller than everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so I remember grabbing my first rebound and feeling like, man, just so much joy and fulfillment in finding something that I could potentially be good at.
Yeah.
And at like 8 and 9 years old, it's kind of like I was just a kid. Despite my parents even divorcing, that didn't affect me back then. I couldn't put A and B together. All I knew was I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be with my friends. I wanted to be doing something. And so fast forwarding a little bit, at the age of 14 is when I took my first drink. I was with my buddy, Chris Tyler. He was our neighbor, and it was a half a 40 ounce. And in that moment, I felt like I was in heaven, whatever that meant. I felt like I didn't have a worry in the world. I felt like life was okay. Despite what was happening, despite my past, life was okay. And in that moment, I believe, based on my past, I had a perfect equation for the enemy. I was a broken little boy. I used sports and friends and things in the community to identify me. And as soon as I found alcohol, it was like almost as if I found my ticket out of anything I have faced or anything I would face. And so as a young kid, I learned that I can always go to this place, whether I'm happy, sad, or anything in between. I could find an escape route with alcohol.
Yeah.
And I didn't know until I was 22 years old that my granddad died of cirrhosis of the liver. My father was a functioning alcoholic. Both of my uncles used a lot of drugs, spent a lot of time in prison. And these are things I didn't know until like my 4th or 5th rehab, that I had in my lineage, per se, addiction and dysfunction and loss of identity. And so fast forwarding a little bit more, I started really struggling with alcohol at the age of 18. Prior to 18, I had offers from literally every college in the world, per se, to go play football on scholarship. Mm-hmm. And so here I was as an 18-year-old kid. I knew I struggled with alcohol, but everyone didn't know. It was kind of that weekend thing, but I was blacking out every weekend. So I was kind of able to hide it in high school. None of the colleges recruited me knew of this problem. And so I chose to go to Virginia Tech. Within my first year, I checked myself into rehab at 18 years old. I was a second-string quarterback, and I was drinking myself to sleep every night. Yeah. And at 18, I had this love-hate relationship with God, right? I was raised in church. I grew up knowing that God existed. I grew up going to church 3 times a week. And so I committed all my first sins in church. It's like we lived there. And so when I was old enough to not go, I didn't want to go, because I kind of seen how, man, if God was real, if he was good, why did these things happen in my life? Why did these things happen with my parents? Why did I have to witness the abuse that was happening to my mom, right? That crushed me, but I was too small to do anything. And so I grew up with all these things in my heart, and I didn't know how to view God. And so at 18, 19, my drinking continued in college.
Yeah.
As a star quarterback, where every day I would leave my dorm and I would have to put on a costume. And that costume wore a smiley face, and I would just sign autographs because everything was good. Everything was great. Even though at 18 and 19 years old, I didn't want to play football, but I also didn't want to live, because here I was given this ability to play this sport, but I knew in my heart, even at 18, it wasn't fulfilling me. So it was almost a gift and a curse. I'm grateful that I didn't find true fulfillment in sports, but I also hated God at that time, because I believed, if God is God, why can't he take this desire away from me? This desire to want to escape through alcohol, right? And so obviously I didn't have a clear picture of God, but the picture I had was dysfunctional at best. And so my college career lasted 5 years. I was in and out of rehab. And I'm grateful for people who prayed for me, because I was able to admit I had a problem. And so they didn't get rid of me at Virginia Tech. I really thank Coach Beamer. He's seen the innocence in me, right? So my addiction led me to sleeping in hotels, drinking myself to death. I wasn't really robbing people or looking for trouble. Every time I picked up the bottle, it was like a suicide mission. It was solo. I'm by myself. I'm in a dark place. I lose everything instantly. I'm drinking myself to sleep. I'm weeping because how sick I am, but also because I'm not living up to God's best in me. And I knew it. And that's where I had to drink more. I had to forget. I had to escape. And so my football career from about the age of 14 ended at the age of 26. Here I am, I'm 26 years old. I graduated Virginia Tech. Coach Beamer invited me back to the pro day because he had heard that I was doing good. I was sober for a year and a half. I started to train again back home in Maryland. And so he invited me to the pro day. From that pro day, I got picked up by Montreal Alouettes, which is the CFL. So it's a step below the NFL. I was there for about 13 months. I was the third or fourth string quarterback, but I can also play wide receiver. So they kept me on a team, which was a miracle. But one day there was a knock on my door, and it was a random guy that I never met. And he said, "Hey, Whitaker, I hate to break it to you. I need your playbook. We're releasing you." And so I built a relationship with the coach. And so I thought at least they would say, "Hey, we'll help you transition. We'll maybe look for another team that can use you." It wasn't any of that. It was a knock on the door. "Hey, you got to go. There'll be a taxi downstairs in an hour." I got so drunk in the airport. And what happened, looking back, was my identity was solely still in football. And what I was doing, I was using God to accomplish something that I desired. And it was subconsciously. It wasn't me waking up saying, "Hey, God, I need you to help me do this so I can go on with my life and forget about you." It wasn't like I understood that. And I believe people may be on a journey, and unconsciously, we may be using God to accomplish something, but God, quite frankly, he desires our whole heart, because he knows that ultimately what I'm pursuing is not going to fulfill me. He's the only thing that fulfills me. And then if he happens to allow me to do something, all that is extra. All that is icing on the cake. And so my football career ended at 26 years old in Warsaw, Poland, sleeping on the streets of Poland.
Wow.
And I've lost everything. I was totally addicted to alcohol. I was hopeless, suicidal, you name it. And I ended up in some type of rehabilitation home there. A few people knew English. They helped me get my passport back. And I got back to Maryland, literally by the grace and mercy of God, literally. I should have died in Warsaw, Poland. And I was that broken. I was that discouraged. And I made it back home. And this goes to the latter part of my testimony. I made it back home in Maryland, and my sister, my mom, my family, they knew how broken I was. And they weren't mad at me, they were hurt. my mom seen her son, this broken man, right? With all this potential, but couldn't finish the task, if you will, in sports. And a lot of Maryland viewed me in the same light. This guy with all this potential, with all this talent, didn't make it to the big dance. And I carried that weight so much that I never went back to Maryland. I stayed far away from Maryland. I traveled state to state. I knew how to meet new people. I knew how to form new relationships within minutes or seconds because I had to be this chameleon. I had to learn how to pretend like I was okay. And I learned that at 16 and 17 years old. So here I am, I'm back home in Maryland. My dear sister, I was struggling with alcohol in Maryland. She would write me letters every morning. I would wake up, I would come to, and it would be this letter on the table. And it would be her saying, hey, I love you. God has a plan for you. God has called you. And so there was this one weekend where there was this youth conference, and I'm 26. I no longer consider myself a youth. And my sister was begging me to go to this conference. And I'm like, I'm good. I'm good with God. I'm done. I can't. And my tone wasn't like it is now. It was more of a quiet, broken, ashamed. I'm done. Like, I can't. I don't know if I can get in the ring again and strap my boots on one more time. And she kept loving me. And so eventually this youth conference came and I said, okay, Ashley, I'll work the door. I'll just hand out wristbands to these young people and call it good. Halfway through the sermon, I was at the altar completely destroyed, completely broken. The man who preached, his name was Phil Muella from Hayward, California. He flew in, him and his wife, they flew in to do the conference. He talked about fatherlessness. He talked about brokenness. He talked about everything I was struggling with. And it was so clear that I had not yet met God. That I had this view of God that was more than just blurry. I couldn't identify who God truly was. Was he like my dad? Was he like my uncles? Was he like my coaches? Who some of them said, hey, this is how you work hard, this is how you prepare, but they were smoking weed every chance they got. Yeah. Not to judge those men, but I didn't know who God really was. And this man, Philip Muella, was able to explain God that night in a way that I hadn't heard of. Because if it was up to me, I was already going to hell. It was just a matter of time based on my sin, based on my disconnection. And so long story short, he was the director of Master's Commission. So 4 weeks later, by the grace of God, I get $4,000 and I'm heading to Hayward, California in Master's Commission at 26 years old. And Master's is geared toward younger people, 16 and 17-year-olds or 18 and 19-year-olds that graduate high school and they don't want to go to college. They want to figure out the call of God on their life. Yeah. Kind of like Jason. It's like you get this time to see, man, what does God have for me? And so here I'm 26 and everyone else is 19, maybe 20 if they decided to stay a second year. So the first 6 months of Master's Commission, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Because these younger teenagers, they're trying to teach me how to clean bathrooms. They're telling me what I can and cannot do. And so my time at Master's Commission was for me to learn how to follow. It wasn't for me to learn.
Did you pause that or actually stop it? I just don't want it to go again. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. No, I'm saying the alarm itself it's not going to go off again. Okay, cool. Sorry about that.
You're good. So my time I'll shorten this. My time in Master's Commission was about me learning how to follow. Because all my life I was a leader. Whether I was a good one or a bad one, I was leading people in 9th grade as a starting varsity quarterback, not knowing what to really do, but I was put in this position and I had seniors and juniors looking at me saying, hey, we got to win. And at 14 years old, I had to take this role of a leader. And so in Master's Commission, I had to learn how to follow, which was the hardest but needed thing for me. So in Master's, there was something called the call, this huge event put on by Lou Engle. It was in Oakland, California. And so long story short, Rachel, who is now my wife, her and 3 of her friends traveled to Oakland, California for 3 days just for this call. Well, I'm in master's commission, and in master's, there's no dating or anything like that. So we had 12 people on our team. And so we carpooled to the event. Rachel's friend knew someone at the church that I was doing master's through. So Rachel and I met literally for a half a second. After the event, Rachel had been fasting. Her food was ready. So she ran off to go eat. And that was it. Like, there was nothing, like, we talked. Is she the one? I was in master's, and I was not even thinking about a relationship or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so I see something maybe a week or 2 later. Somebody created a blog on Facebook concerning the event that happened, the call. And so I see Rachel had wrote literally a book about her time in Africa.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, man, that was the girl that was at the call. And my heart started racing because my mom had done missions in Africa for the last 15 years. I've been traveling playing football, so I couldn't go. And so my stepdad was from Africa. My mom met a guy, and all this deep stuff about Africa that I was now connected with through my family. Here it is, Rachel writing about her time, literally serving in Africa, not for a month or 2, but for the last 5 years of her life. And I'm like, who is this girl? So I asked her a question. I said, hey, you have to tell me more about Africa. And it was the first time where I did not Facebook stalk or try to figure out what she looked like.
Of course we do that, right?
Right? It was the first time that it was a genuine pursuit of like, man, tell me more.
Yeah.
And so we started talking. It went from A to Z within 2 days, and I had to stop talking to her because I was in master's commission. And I didn't have much tact back then. So I just said, hey, I can't talk to you no more. I'm in master's. She got upset. 3 days later, she emailed me and she said, you're right. You got to focus on master's. Awesome. My director said, hey, since you laid that down, the last month of master's commission will allow you to talk to Rachel. That conversation in a month led to me graduating June 8th, moving to Spokane June 9th, getting engaged July 4th, getting married September 4th.
Congratulations.
Really quick, right? I was 27, she was 29. We knew, we got married. And all hell broke loose when I got married. I've been married going on 9 years. 5 of those years I spent apart from my family.
Whoa.
I spent on the streets of Spokane, Washington. I spent in rehabs, psych wards, you name it. It's just the last 2.5 years that I've been set free completely. And that's the part I'm going to anchor in. God gave me a woman that would love me despite me, which didn't make sense. I was the first one to sign up to say, hey, Rachel, you should leave. I don't know how to love you. I don't know how to receive love. I don't know how to be a dad. I don't know how to be a husband. I don't want to hurt you no more. You should leave. I'm incapable. And it was in that moment of her not leaving, it opened my heart up to God. Because God said, if this woman can love you like this, how much more do I love you? And it completely wrecked me. And then through Rachel's love, it opened my heart up to God in the gospel. And it was 2.5 years ago, I was sitting in rehab. And I was a person that I would hear people say, hey, God woke me up at 2 a.m. and I couldn't go back to sleep. And I was like, okay, cut it out. I hear you. And that happened. I'm in rehab at 2 a.m. He woke me up and I began to worship and weep. I didn't know what was happening. I can't put a finger on it. 2 hours later, I leave my room. I go downstairs of this rehab and literally the footsteps of Christ. He came and he said, Ike, I did it for you. In that moment, he has set me free completely. And it was the same correlation I got. He loved me at a time where I had nothing to offer. And that's how he would have liked it. Because he knew for me, I found my identity in doing things. So he knew if I had any part in my deliverance, I would have anchored in, I did this, or I did that, or I was able to do this. I didn't do anything. It was God. It was people interceding, my wife, my pastor, my friends. God, they prayed, God, show yourself to Ike. Show him who you are. Show him that you're not waiting for him to make a mistake so you can let him know how bad he is. And it was that revelation that set me free completely. And that's what I carry today, that I could run into God's arms completely unafraid.